It's exciting to be here on the Gamecock morning. We'll talk more about the Gamecocks later when Commissioner Clyburn gets back. My name is Augie Grant. I have the pleasure of having jumped back and forth from industry to academia for about the last 30 years. And part of the thing I do with Technology Futures is the Communication Technology Update and Fundamentals. This is a book we do every 2 years. It has the latest on consumer electronics, computers, networking, mass media, and telephony. But that's all. One of the pleasures, just to give an interesting counterpoint, one of the pleasures of academic life is you can actually study as many different things as you want if you find one way to tie them in together. And the way we tie these together is with what I call the communication technology ecosystem, where when you're studying technology, you not only have to pay attention to the hardware, and we had a great introduction to the hardware yesterday. You have to pay attention to the software and the content as well, but around that is the organizational infrastructure, then all of the political and social systems that surround it, with special attention to the individual users. And that's kind of where I want to go today. I am, by training, a sociologist. My expertise is studying the people who use the technology, so I'm going to try and provide insights into what's going on in the field, but with a much heavier dose of DNA than RF. So we'll see how we do on that. Before we start, I want to remind you that as we study people, the single most powerful force in human behavior is habit. It constrains what we do. Even as you think, how did you come to the room today from wherever you were? You probably took the same path you took yesterday. When you drive to work in the morning, you probably take the same route, even though there may be a dozen or even more different ways to get from your home to work. Well, the same thing is true in media. And this gives an incredible inertia to any existing media company, and an incredible challenge whenever anyone's trying to do something new. We'll get into some of the implications of this as we go through what's going on. Now, to start out, I want to stress all of the technologies that we looked at yesterday and we're going to look at today are interconnected. I put 5G at the center of this because 5G is the center of everything we're talking about. But as you look at everything else, 5G is an incredible enabling technology. It's also an incredible competitive technology, for example, for ATSC 3.0 that we'll talk about. So when we're looking at these opportunities and we're looking at the constraints, we've got to start by realizing that it's kind of like dominoes. In fact, I thought of throwing a graphic in here just showing dominoes falling over and making the great pattern of 5G, but my hands aren't steady enough to do the dominoes, so imagine it. All right, let's start with TV. We have 3 parts of TV we have to understand, or perhaps more developments going on in TV than anything except, of course, telephony. And we'll take these 3 parts one at a time. First, something you've all heard about, 4K television. 4K is part of a revolution in TV that's giving better pictures. We have roughly 4 times the picture information you have from a high-definition signal, and approximately 20 times the information you have from an old-fashioned NTSC signal, if those of you go back 20 years. But it's not only the increased resolution in terms of each individual picture, we also have increased dynamic range, that is, increased difference between the lightest part of the picture and the darkest part of the picture. So you say, wow, this is really cool. Except you can't see it. I mean, if you go into a store and you get right up on the screen, and here's a 4K and here's an HD, you can see the difference. But when you move back to a normal viewing distance, 6 to 10 feet, you can't see the difference. And this is one of the things we have to be cautious of. We know if we're buying a TV, almost everyone says, oh yeah, I want the 4K TV. And there's a concern about delivering the content. How much bandwidth is it going to take? But as a practical matter, the average person cannot see a difference. In fact, the average person couldn't see much difference between high-definition TV and the previous NTSC standard. The biggest thing they could see was the picture was wider. and the screens were flat. That made it easy to sell those televisions. And the companies in the television manufacturing business did great business selling the HD TVs. Since then, they've tried to come out with other innovations. 3D TV, curved TV, they've all just fallen flat. 4K is the latest attempt. It is technically a significant improvement. But what they're watching on their 4K TVs is the regular old thing they've been watching all along. This is what's more important. ATSC 3.0 that has not been getting the headlines. If you went to CES or followed the news out of the Consumer Electronics Show last week, or I guess 2 weeks ago now, in Las Vegas, all of the headlines were about 8K and 4K TV. We'll talk about 8K in a second. There was very little mention of ATSC 3.0, but this is a new transmission standard for broadcasters. This allows the broadcasters to deliver much more content so they can deliver a 4K signal, which right now the only way you can get a true 4K signal is over the internet. And broadcasters want to be able to compete with that. But that's not all. You have the capability to increase the frame rate. One of the biggest limitations we have is almost every TV format, almost everything delivered is limited to 30 frames a second. Even the best broadcast TV today is only 60 frames a second. That gives an illusion of unreality to everything that you watch. As the frame rate increases, the pictures become more real. The eye can be more fooled to thinking this is reality. 120 frames per second. Now, the TVs will display that. They keep refreshing, but they're playing the same signal 4 times. Taking a 30 frames per second signal, showing it 4 times. A true 120 frames per second signal is going to take more bandwidth, and it's going to give a more realistic picture. So if we're looking for something viewers might notice, this would be it. The biggest thing broadcasters want out of this, though, is the mobile television. There was a mobile TV standard introduced about 15 years ago that didn't really go very far. They're trying again with ATSC 3.0 to take the native TV signal and have it picked up, because they don't want everyone to have to use their cellular bandwidth in order to watch live television. They want every device to be able to have a chip in it. Same way, for example, that almost every cell phone has an FM chip built in. Problem is the phone companies disable the FM chip, saying, oh, we can't let anyone enjoy content for free. They must pay us. I have great criticism for any company that chooses, especially in times of emergency, to say no one may have bandwidth unless it comes through us. So finally, there's targeted advertising. The opportunity exists to deliver individualized advertising with ATSC 3.0. So broadcasters see this as a way to compete more effectively with all of the internet-enabled delivery systems. There's a challenge, though. The only way you deliver an ATSC 3.0 signal is by having a brand new frequency. So broadcasters have been told by the FCC they do not get a new signal. Rather, they have to partner with someone else in the market, take one person's frequency, and transmit 2 TV stations with the old format, take another person's frequency, and transmit the 2 in the new format. And there's no requirement that cable television or satellite carry the new signal. So we've got some barriers that have to be overcome. And there's very little incentive for anyone to work with broadcasters in providing the retransmission. So this is something you'll be hearing a lot more about 2020, 2021, but broadcasters today are as concerned about this as you are about 5G. Again, the biggest issue is it's incompatible, and you don't have user awareness that this is coming along. Having said that, broadcasters are eager to say, how can we get more revenue? The same way that they use the retransmission consent rules to get money out of cable TV and satellite services for rebroadcasting their signals, they see this as another revenue opportunity. Now, the other big development, the third big development in television, is the over-the-top television. This is an area that continues to grow. Up at the top are the logos from companies we're all used to seeing, Netflix being, of course, the big one. They've actually just passed 50% penetration in the US. And you saw Larry's graph yesterday showing the continual growth. The biggest issue here is there continue to be new competitors. Disney and AT&T, through its Warner Media subsidiary, are getting into this with their own. Comcast is rumored, depending on what you see, to try their own. The thing that stands out is almost all of these services cost less than $15 a month. Some go as low as $5 a month if you take advertising, a higher price if you don't take advertising. Hulu, for example, announced a new pricing plan this week after Netflix announced increase in their subscription rate. Hulu said, well, if you don't want advertising, you pay much more, but if you take all our advertising, you pay less. It's going to be interesting to see what that happens, but you've got to realize these are very minor costs when you're talking about $5 to $15 a month. And what's happened, the industry was concerned about the phenomenon of cord cutting. What would happen when someone could drop cable TV, and instead of having cable TV, they could get anything they wanted through these over-the-top services? And the interesting thing that's emerged, and this one of these strange things, I will see whether or not you react to this or not, but I was sitting there yesterday hearing this and said, there's a word for what people are doing. And it's not cord cutting, it's cord hoarding. That is, people have the opportunity to get these services, and most are not dropping cable. Rather, they're keeping cable or satellite and layering on top of that Netflix and Amazon Prime or CBS All Access. Anybody see the new season of Star Trek Discovery? Any Trekkies? Just curious. Oh, none. Then you don't even care that they're coming out with 2 more Star Trek series on CBS All Access, including one in development with Patrick Stewart, reprising his role as Jean-Luc. But you don't care, that's okay. What you need to care about is the cord hoarders. The idea that individuals have disposable income that they spend on media. In fact, in studies of media, there is a principle we use called the principle of relative constancy that says over time, the proportion of disposable income spent on media is relatively constant. So as times get better, as the economy is good, people have more money they will spend on media. And there are different places they're spending it. But adding $5, adding 10, I mean, come on. For the price of 2 Starbucks, you get to have the Starship Discovery. It's the final frontier. Anyway, this is an important factor we're going to get back to a little bit later. What do we have to look at coming down the road? Again, we not only want to look at near term or far term. 8K TV was old hat, so at CES, I'm sorry, 4K TV was old hat, so at CES, manufacturers introduced their 8K displays. This is a solution in search of a problem. The only place, in my opinion, that 8K is practical is in digital signage, where you want people perhaps working very close to a TV. That's not going to mean they're not going to sell them. If you go into a store and a salesperson gives you a choice, here's the old-fashioned TV for $700, or you can get the latest for $1,200. Some people will go with the $700, but some people who want the latest, they want to make sure they're going to make that TV last for 10 years, will get the 8K, not knowing there is absolutely no difference in what they're going to see in day-to-day use. But if 8K becomes a popular format, then we have to worry about the amount of bandwidth it's going to take to deliver the signals. So I put lots of question marks around 8K. I think it's more important to look at possible increases in frame rate, because increases in frame rate for any type of transmission are much more visible to the consumer. And you can expect the first place this will appear once 4K broadcast comes out is in sports broadcasting. That will give you a much better signal and will give you a much bigger bandwidth. challenge. Similarly, HDR, slightly perceptual because, again, you have greater differences between the darkest darks, the lightest lights, and all of the colors. So this high dynamic range TV may have some potential, but again, requires extra bandwidth. As we talk about TV, it's important to know that we have some interesting developments in audio, not in the technology, because frankly, we've been able to give everything you can hear for the last 20 years. I love people talking about going back to vinyl. It's an inferior technology compared to digital, superior in some respects because it is an analog format, and our ears, of course, are analog. But the biggest developments are the consolidation, with SiriusXM acquiring Pandora, iHeartMedia coming out of bankruptcy, potentially Cumulus coming out of bankruptcy. We may see a big reshuffling. And these may be great acquisition targets for distributors that are looking to increase revenues, and we'll talk about that. The most important thing you want to keep in mind is audio is a ubiquitous technology. You look at people in day-to-day lives, they have headphones in. They're listening to music, or they're listening to podcasts, or they're listening to their favorite radio show. The average use is about 2 to 3 hours a day per person. So even though it's not sexy, the fact that it's so ubiquitous is something we have to pay attention to. All right, let's move on. I said people are spending a lot of their they have a lot more disposable income. Where are they spending it? Because they spend a little bit more at the movie theaters, not much more on music. We get to the video game industry, I'm going to give you the good news, bad news. The good news is here is where a lot of that money is going. When you look at total video game revenues in 2018, we're $43.4 billion. This is more than 10 times the revenue of ESPN. And when I say ESPN, I mean all of the ESPNs, and the advertising revenue and the subscription revenue and the magazine and everything else. The average broadcast network has revenues of about $4 to $5 billion a year. Video games dwarf that. So we have to say there's an opportunity there that a lot of people are looking at. And you have to realize that the revenue opportunity is a complicated one. For those of you who love to study economics, you want to realize it's not just buying the games. Buying the games is one source of revenue. But the developers of games have realized that if instead of buying it, you can get someone to buy a subscription, then you're picking up a monthly check. And if you allow additional in-game purchases, more revenue. And if the environment can include images, it's an advertising vehicle. And a lot of the music you hear is placed by the record companies as a way of promoting the music. About the only place that they're not making money is on the hardware, because most of the console makers subsidize the hardware, selling it below the cost of production in order to have more people buying the games. So they've created a very complicated ecosystem that is very lucrative. It certainly rivals network TV as a whole in terms of revenue. Not telephony. I mean, telephony is still about 4-7 times as much, depending on whose numbers you use. And now I said there's bad news. You look at this graph. Wow, that's a hockey stick, Augie. How can that be bad news? This is from a TVB Europe. And the interesting thing, if you look closely, is they have projected. And the industry rags tend to generally give rosy projections. So let's cut out the projections and just look at what's going on. This is the revenue from virtual reality. You can see VR had a couple of good years, but instead of continuing to rise in 2018, it went down. And I say this is bad news for the video game industry because this was seen as the driver of video games. It's not to say that virtual reality does not have a bright future. In fact, we just top secret news, so don't tell anybody. University of South Carolina is going to host an international conference in 2020 on the use of virtual reality in education. And we're going to have both academic papers looking at studies of the effectiveness of VR, and we're going to have a showcase where people can show things they've developed. We know virtual reality works in education. We know it works in pilot training. Nobody flies a plane without being in a simulator. We know that law enforcement and the military make extensive use of it in training, and architects can't work without VR today. But as a gaming technology, it hasn't taken off. That's not to say that Facebook isn't going to continue to give us new versions of the Oculus Rift, and that HTC is not going to give us a Vive Pro Plus and all of the others. But we have to realize that the VR is becoming much more of a niche application. In fact, VR typically includes a number of different technologies that are related to each other. We have the standard virtual reality with the HMD and the sensors. We actually put on a boot camp at the University of South Carolina last year, teaching faculty how to create content in VR so they could use it in teaching. Part of that, though, was also introducing augmented reality. How can we take, instead of putting people in a new world, how can we layer things on the world? So with the right HMD, the Microsoft HoloLens, for example, or even a cell phone, how can you hold it up and show something that wasn't there before? A lot of individuals in this industry say this is the future. We have to keep watch. The amount of bandwidth needed is relatively minor. Economic potential is huge, but remember Pokemon Go? Many of you have played Pokemon Go anytime in the last 6 months. Okay, 2. Okay, and ever. How many have played Pokemon Go ever? Same 2. It was very popular for a while, and then just kind of went away, and everyone waited for the next thing like it. Still waiting. That's not to say it won't happen, but right now we don't have a critical mass. 360 video. The idea, I loved last year that we were streamed this conference. There was a camera in the middle that was shooting 360 video. For certain applications, for certain news events, there's nothing that compares to it. So this is a new technology. A lot of people call it virtual reality because it works better if you're wearing an HMD while you're experiencing it. It's not virtual reality. It's just simply another way of doing video, and it is a factor to watch. I had a bunch of slides in here yesterday, and as the day went on yesterday, I started throwing slides away on the 5G and 5G implications. Throwing this one away too. All right, what did we not hear a lot about? We didn't hear a lot about personal assistants. This is another hockey stick. This is real adoption levels. This happens to be the adoption of the Alexa. And we see it's not just the Alexa, it's Google Home, it's Siri, it's Bixby. There are many different varieties of that. And you combine that with the Internet of Things, the idea that we can combine intelligence and networking with any device, and you get an interesting ecosystem. The personal assistant, in effect, becomes the control point to control everything in a house, whether it's your thermostats, your lighting. This is one that, again, I loved all the discussion yesterday about the enabling features of 5G, but this can work without 5G. Regular Wi-Fi or Zigbee or Bluetooth. There are many enabling technologies, but the biggest thing is putting these together are going to give us a new ecosystem in a home. Incredible opportunities, whether you're looking at security, whether you're looking at surveillance, whether you're looking at comfort, convenience. I like in cases like this to go back to when, 100 years ago, when electricity to the home was new. and an electric wire came into the house, what did we power? Lights. That was the first thing. How many lights in a typical house? In the beginning, yeah. Yeah, one or two in the beginning, and then people figured out if we take these cords to every room, we can have light in every room. Well, IoT is doing a similar thing. When you take connectivity with Wi-Fi to every room, what can we do with it? The idea of everyone having refrigerators and radio clock alarms and televisions and all of these other things that we plug into the wall in our homes. So I still have a lava lamp in my home. Just there are times you need to escape reality, you plug it in, and yeah, that's so cool. 100 years ago, that was not the intention. Some creative individual said, with these technologies, what can we do? And we are just at the beginning. So this is one we need to watch. The penetration of the personal assistants is increasing. The number of devices that can be networked is increasing. So I still don't think my refrigerator is going to tell me when I'm out of milk. I can still open the refrigerator and know when I'm out of milk. But there are other applications, I think, in parenting, or more important, in healthcare, where this is going to become vitally important. The idea that we can be wearing a Fitbit, thanks to all of these electronic technologies. I found out this past year I had a very serious sleep problem, got treated, everything is much better now, and I love my Fitbit because it tells me things are better every day. My late mother, before she passed, wore a device, and if she had any problem, she could hit a button. A little beyond the I'm fallen and I can't get up. But think about the capabilities once we can embed the internet, what we can do in providing health care. When someone needs to be monitored, they don't have to be in a hospital. We can have home health care going to a new level. It's going to change many, many things going on in health. It's going to mean you as networking people, the more health things are out there, the more you have to worry about HIPPA. These have to be secure. The regulations regarding privacy are different in healthcare than they are for financial. As we heard yesterday, we have big holes when it comes to financial information. When it comes to health information, we have what I think are some pretty good rules. And would you agree?
Yeah, I would say probably HIPAA is a little more inclusive.
Yeah, not perfect, but better. But it also means it's also restrictive. If you are providing this health information, if you're in a contractual arrangement, you've got to be much more protective because the sanctions are much more severe. Not only that, there are insurance implications. Who's going to pay for all of this? And much more important than the insurance company saying, well, now that we can monitor you at home, we're not going to let you go to the hospital. We're going to dictate your coverage. What's even worse is when insurance companies have the ability to say, you know what, you're wearing a Fitbit, we want to get the data from that Fitbit, and we're going to monitor you, and then we're going to decide what your rates should be. There are huge privacy implications. There are huge implications that, again, the whole issue, prevention versus treatment. When you have the Internet of Things, the number of things we can use to monitor our health, we can have much more preventative technologies than actually treating conditions after they happen. The big question is, and I couldn't think of the best words to do this. You can probably give me better words, but I just used LAN versus WAN. That is, LAN being a Wi-Fi signal. Simple signal I control around my house versus a WAN, a signal controlled by the provider where the device connects directly with the network. I know when it comes to my Fitbit, it goes through Wi-Fi. I can monitor, but I have control over that. When it comes to my CPAP machine, that has a modem built in, and it sends the signal back to a base station every day, and I have no control over that. We have to think about what networks are going to be implicated as we bring more and more health care into the home. All right, big picture. I said organizational structure is one of the most interesting things to study because it's changing so often. This is the diagram I showed a year ago that Rico did a year ago. The environment is still pretty much the same, except Time Warner has been swallowed now by AT&T, making AT&T bigger, and the time has gone out of it. It's Warner Media now, so that is even bigger in terms of revenue potential. A few other small changes. For example, Disney is 21st Century Fox, which tried to buy Time Warner without success, then realized, well, we're just going to break ourselves up. So they got rid of most of the movie studios and TV production, kept the Fox channel and the Fox network. We still have to look at the Nexstar purchase of Tribune. There are always rumors about CBS and Viacom getting back together, and there may be more pending deals. Give you some ideas on that in a second. We talked a lot this week about mobile connectivity. I just want to re-stress, this is the biggest technology that we've got to be concerned about for your business, any area of telephony, because we have to have the connectivity to provide the people with the services. People want to have whatever they want, whenever they want, wherever they are. And with very few exceptions, that's what they're getting. So that continues. Have to do a quick nod to autonomous vehicles. The interesting thing is not just that the cars are networked. I love it when I get in my car now and my app tells me what my vehicle health is, tells me when it's time for an oil change. That's a nice advance. But I love my car, by the way. I'm averaging 97 miles per gallon since I bought the car. It's one of the hybrid battery hybrid cars. So it runs on battery until the battery runs out, and then it runs on a gas engine. Love it. And it keeps me from changing lanes. It stops when I get too close. This is a big thing that networking is doing to cars. We know everyone is talking about autonomous vehicles, but the technology that's here now is assistive technology. Started with cars that would park themselves. Now it's adaptive cruise control. It's lane keeping technology. The end result is safer automobiles, and these things are they're not asking consumers, do you want them? They're building them into cars. The Department of Transportation is actively working to have vehicle-to-vehicle communication, so if somebody stops short 3 cars ahead, your car will know it and automatically slow down. So we're getting a safer environment there. Have to make a brief mention of blockchain and cryptocurrency. How we pay, how consumers are going to pay for everything may change. There's one group of people who are huge advocates of cryptocurrency that talk about its potential for transactions and the security of the blockchain. I work with one company called One World that's developed a whole ecosystem for advertising, where a consumer who consumes content pays for it with credit that they build up by looking at advertising or taking polls or surveys. So they've got a whole ecosystem that keeps track of every transaction for the consumer using blockchain technology. It has incredible potential, not quite there yet, but they're getting close. AI. There's a lot I want to say about AI. We heard more yesterday than I know, so I'm just going to say, I don't know where it's going. But I think in 2 years, it may be as important to what we're doing as 5G is now. It's one we have to watch. Regulatory issues, obviously. Privacy is emerging as one of the biggest issues, but I think there's going to be a wave. Regulation comes in waves in Washington. I think we're going to have a wave of antitrust concerns coming over the next 3 years. You can do your math and figure out what I'm saying. There are also going to be huge issues of equity and subsidy in terms of access to technology that we have to pay attention to. So we have to look at the regulatory field, look at the provision, and realize there are huge advantages to having technologies with universal access, social advantages, doing social good. Social media. I could do a whole hour on social media. I'm going to sum it up. We have a tipping point. The privacy concerns are being examined in every dimension. You have increased costs for both users and providers. The usage is starting to decline. There's still an attempt to hyper-target in terms of bringing in the ad revenue. But the biggest issue is if the use declines enough, we lose the critical mass, and the whole advantage of having social media goes away. So there are more question marks in social media than anything else. I will not personally buy stock in any social media company right now. I want to see a little more stability coming to the market. Kind of like home shopping was in the 1980s. Got really, really big, and everybody wanted again, and suddenly somebody realized there's not that much there. I don't know if social media is the home shopping of the 21st century. We'll have to wait and see. That's not a bad thing. Home Shopping Network and QVC are still around and making billions of dollars. All right, I got to mention at least one slide on 5G since we've talked about it. I see 5G providing a range of competitors for cable unless cable gets there first. We know that the bandwidth is there and the ubiquity is there, and we know it provides all this. Again, the biggest thing is there's a potential for an incredible set of new revenue streams if the telcos choose to take advantage and plan far enough in advance. Obviously, as time moves forward, we want to watch all of these things. I would say the privacy concerns are the ones that need to be higher on your radar because they're going to impact how we do business. And number 2 on my list is IoT. I put 5G number 3. I want to come back to content because the reason we have the networking is to consume content. We know the average adult, I love Larry's graphs yesterday, more than 4 hours a day of television. That's up significantly. It's interesting. When the internet was a very new technology, average viewing consumption per day was less than 4 hours. And people were asked, well, how's the internet going to affect your TV viewing? And they said, oh, I'll watch less TV. And it went up. And how will social media affect it? Well, I'll watch less TV. And viewing consumption went up. No matter what you do, you ask people, how will this affect your TV? They'll say it will go down. But average adult use of television has gone up consistently over the past 20 years because there are more choices, more things. And most television is provided on a subscription basis, and we have the range of prices we talked about. I want you to compare that to other content. Magazines, where you're paying $5 a year, maybe $15, $20 a year, a little less than an over-the-top service. But this is a small service people add on to their media diet. Newspapers, on the other hand, Wednesday morning was sitting in the Columbia airport waiting to get on the plane and got an email from my local newspaper. They're raising my subscription rate from $55 a month to $65 a month. Okay, I made a call and I got it kept at 55, but I want you to think about that. How many things are people willing to pay $50 a month for? It's not a lot. It's not any of the over-the-top services. They'll pay it for their cell phone service, and their cable TV service, and their newspaper. Maybe home security, maybe not. What's the point? If you follow the news and the media, Gannett, one of the biggest newspaper companies in the world that owns USA Today, laid off a major part of its staff this week and got a hostile takeover bid for, what was it, $1.3 billion? Can you imagine, if you're a telephone company, doing an acquisition, let's say you overpay, you'll pay $1.5 billion, and get Gannett and USA Today and have that opportunity for a change in ARPU of $50 a month and the ability to deliver content with local teams that know advertisers? Again, if companies who are in the networking business, whether Comcast or Charter or T-Mobile or AT&T or Verizon, if you're looking for a way to say, how do we add on? AT&T showed an example with its acquisition of Time Warner. The newspaper companies are delivering, collecting, and producing original content. So, I just wanted to leave you with something provocative. That's my time. I think I allowed exactly 3 minutes for questions. All right. Or challenges. Again, the nice thing about being an academic, I love it when students bring in facts to contradict anything I said. So, questions, opposition, or anybody want to start a bidding war for a media company?
Why do you still subscribe to a home delivery hard copy of the newspaper?
3 reasons. First, I'm a journalism professor. I not only subscribe to a home delivery of that paper, I also get electronic delivery of 2 other papers, Washington Post and New York Times. I have to support the medium I work in. I do like looking at the local news. I typically read the breaking news items online, but you got to pay for that content somehow. And I love the daily Sudoku. And that doesn't come online.
Thank you, Augie.